If you're in the process of getting divorced, most people will tell you to go to a lawyer, but it's quite important to know how much one will cost. To help me answer that question, I'm joined by Neil Russell of Satan Solicitors, who's described in the Legal 500, the leading directory of lawyers, as one of the go-to people in the field of divorce law in London. Neil, how do people know if they can actually afford to get divorced?
Well, there are many people who are not able to afford to get divorced, which means they may not be able to afford a lawyer, but they may be able to afford the court fee, which for a divorce petition is £550. And that will then enable them to start the divorce process. In order to issue a financial remedy application, there is a separate court fee of around £250. So they're the only costs that you need to be able to afford to start the process if you don't have enough money to fund a solicitor.
Thank you. And if you'd like to hear Neil explaining financial procedures in big money divorce cases, you can have a look at this video here. I'll put the link up again at the end of this video. It's also in the show notes below. Neil, what happens if one spouse suspects that the other spouse is hiding money, that they're not being fully frank with their assets, and they need to be able to get hold of money in the short term to be able to fund a lawyer to deal with the divorce? What options are open to them?
Yes, you need to start the process, but you can seek a legal services payments order where if your partner has sufficient funds and you do not, you can seek access to those funds to enable you to meet costs. And that can and often does include legal fees as well. And in the words of Lord Justice Thorpe, where there's everything to fight for and nothing to fight with, we need to find a level playing field, and that sometimes requires an application to the court to require the other party to meet your fees. I should also add that there are divorce loans available which can provide for the provision of legal fees. The costs of those divorce loans are at or around 15 to 18%, comparable with credit card debt. However, generally the legal funding enables the parties not to have to pay anything back on the debt until they receive their settlement.
Does the amount you're worth, either individually or as a couple, affect the quality or cost of the lawyer whom you should instruct? So is there a threshold beyond which you should say, I'm not going to go to my local high street firm, I'm going to go for a firm of top city lawyers?
No, it's what car do I need to drive to the office in? You go to the office in the car that you can afford and or choose to drive. When you're instructing a solicitor, you need to ensure that they have expertise in the area that you want them to have the expertise in. You need them to ensure that they're used to dealing with cases at the level that you are instructing them on. For example, some of the more expensive central London firms will not necessarily be used to dealing with very low income families and or those that might otherwise be eligible for legal aid, although legal aid is a really restricted area these days and few firms do legal aid. But you really need to also not look just at the cost, but also the rapport that you have with your solicitor, because it's an emotional journey and requires a lot of there's a complexity in matrimonial work, unlike ordinary commercial litigation where it's a commercial transaction. Matrimonial litigation is not just a commercial transaction. That said, we do try and take out the emotion to enable parties to more readily reach a settlement which is commercially wise in terms of cost for recovery.
Is there any way, Neil Russell, to know how much a divorce is going to cost in legal fees before you actually embark on the divorce process?
Yeah, the divorce, when we're looking at costs, we're looking at costs for the different aspects of the proceedings. There's the main suit, which is the divorce, and the divorce entails the divorce petition, then the respondent files an acknowledgement of service, then the petitioner applies for the decree nisi, and then they'll generally wait and not apply for the decree absolute until the financial matters are resolved. But the costs of that process, typically to instruct a solicitor, are at or around £1,000 to £1,500 plus VAT, and the court fee of £550. The financial remedy proceedings are very different in terms of cost. There are three main hearings: a first appointment, which is like a case management hearing where the court sees where the parties are at and what further help they need in order to get to a financial dispute resolution appointment, which is an in-court negotiation hearing. where the judge will assist the parties to settle. And then there's the final hearing, which may be 1 to 3 days or longer, depending on the complexity of the case and the issues involved. To get to the first stage, depending on the cost of the solicitor and the barrister that may otherwise be instructed, you could be looking at anything from £5,000 to, say, £20,000 plus VAT. To get to the next hearing, you would be at least doubling those costs, so 10 to 40. And then to get to the final hearing, you would be looking at, say, then 20 to £80,000 plus VAT. So the costs really vary depending on the complexity of the proceedings, the issues involved, and or whether or not experts, single joint experts, are instructed to value property or companies. So it's how long is a piece of string, which sounds like the facetious answer to the question, but it really depends on how big, not necessarily how big the assets are, but how complicated the asset structure is. Because a family home might be worth, say, £5 million, and there may be no other assets. There could be a case where there's £1 million home and many other assets.
Do most cases make it to a final hearing, or are they resolved by, say, agreement or by mediation before the final hearing actually takes place?
Most cases settle rather than going to a final hearing, and I find generally that if they don't settle early on with negotiation and sense, then they often settle at or about the financial dispute resolution hearing, either at that hearing or shortly after. You heard the enormous costs of going to a final hearing, and that discourages most parties from actually reaching the final hearing, so they settle before.
Thank you, Neil Russell of Seddon Solicitors. You can listen to Neil talking about financial procedures in big money divorces here, or you can watch a whole series of different videos on family law here. This is one of my favourite videos, and this is a video you can click on if you want to find out how to ask me a question directly. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Barrister Daniel Barnett. Bye bye.